think we're ready. So hello and welcome everybody to this final session of the Oxford HR Knowledge Festival of 2024. This session is being recorded. Welcome to participants. My name is Rachel Barlow and I have a passion for our topic today, which is the not-for-profit sector and the new EU. So I will briefly introduce myself, but more importantly, I will then introduce our two speakers today. So I recruit for and advise mainly Brussels-based civil society organizations, foundations, think tanks, and associations. I'm a lawyer with a background in public affairs, and I've also taught EU lobbying at the Brussels School of Governance. I particularly enjoy optimizing the governance structures of multi-stakeholder organizations and advising boards on best practice. I also sit on the board of the European Policy Centre. So I now turn to Antonia Potter Prentice. Antonia has nearly 30 years experience in the not-for-profit sector and is now director of Alliance 2015. That's a strategic partnership of European humanitarian and development organizations aimed at enhancing impact through collaboration. I had to read that. Antonia has worked in 8 different countries, including for Oxfam and Save the Children, and was recently elected to sit on the board of Concord. And Concord is the European Confederation of NGOs working on sustainable development and international cooperation. So apart from her wealth of knowledge and vast network, Antonia is quite unusual since she is a multilingual Brit. Our second guest speaker today is Cassia Moraes, who's joining us from Amsterdam. Cassia is Brazilian and also multilingual. She is a climate change and sustainable development policy expert, currently working as the partnerships manager at Climate Kick. Cassia also lectures at the Burgundy School of Business. Very importantly for us, and I'm sure for her, Cassia founded the Youth Climate Leaders in 2018. It's an organization that supports the training and connecting of young people to enable them to start careers as climate leaders. And I know this initiative close to your heart. So welcome, Cassia. So to today's topic, it's in 3 parts. I will first use slides to provide an overview of the relationship between the EU and NGOs. This is a general overview. And then provide some insight into the new leadership of the EU, currently being put in place after the elections to the European Parliament held across the 27 member states last June. Then in a second part, Antonia and Cassia will both talk about upcoming challenges and opportunities in their respective sectors. So please do put questions in the chat, and you can start doing that now, or introduce yourself in the chat. And in the final and third part of this session, we will discuss the priorities and criteria of selection of the actors in these sectors. So what experience and mindset do leaders of EU organizations need to be able to face the future, to be able to be effective and successful in view of the landscape that we'll have set together. So welcome today to everybody. Welcome, Cassia, and welcome, Antonia. Right, I'm going to put up some slides and start with the slideshow. Can you see that? Yeah, super. Right. So the EU has got a long relationship with the not-for-profit sector, non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations. And here this is an all-encompassing slide just to be able to identify 8 areas in which there is an overlap between EU and the non-governmental organizations. And maybe the first one is to look at the top left of the screen is funding and financial support. I'm sure that we'll come back to this during the topic today. I think this is going to be one of the main challenges looking ahead with the new legislature. The second more important, and this is the business of Brussels, policy influence and advocacy. This is about campaigning, it is about lobbying as well, it is about creating alliances. So that's the third part there, networking and partnerships, creating alliances across non-governmental organisations. We will be talking about the hearings of the commissioners designate a little bit later on in this session, and that is a prime example of where NGOs and civil society organisations can cooperate together to ask MEPs to put questions to the commissioners designate. Looking at the second row, standards and regulations. So the EU sets high standards for issues like human rights and environmental protection. Indeed, the EU as a region has the highest level of environmental protection on the globe. And NGOs can leverage these standards to hold governments and corporations accountable and ensuring that they adhere to international norms and practices. Capacity building here in the middle. This is a bit of a heading for the divide in Brussels, certainly between NGOs and business interests on a policy level. And NGOs sometimes struggle. They have smaller offices. They maybe have less funding to pay experts. And so the capacity building element is of great importance. And I expect Antonia's got some insight into that through her experience with the 2 umbrella organizations that you're involved with. Access to information and research. The business community will sometimes say that CSOs are favored in this regard. They can sit at tables where industry and business is not necessarily welcome. I would simply put it as a different approach and a different style of doing things. Something which is probably important, and Cassia, I'm sure, will have insights into this, the international influence. So the link between the international level and the EU level. So the EU provides a legal framework that protects the rights of NGOs and ensures their freedom to operate. So this includes safeguarding the rights to freedom of assembly, expression, and association, which are fundamental for the functioning of NGOs. So over the next 5 years, the EU will continue to be a significant source of funding. However, there are key trends that will shape the funding landscape. And these include the priorities of the multi-annual financial framework, the MFF, encompassing climate and environmental action, social and regional cohesion, the digital transition and ending it fairly as well, and innovation and research. These elements are more and more increasingly important to NGOs in the tech for good space. This is an emerging area of NGOs. But there are others that we should have mentioned, of course, which are the tragic geopolitical developments in Ukraine and increasingly in the Middle East. In brief, NGOs will face several challenges, and I will just mention 3 big ones here. Increased competition for funds. Political context, for example, where the rule of law is under threat, such as in Hungary. And thirdly, administrative burdens, increasing administrative burdens linked to more conditionality and accountability of NGO action and use of funds. So what do we do to know where or which direction our future leaders will be going in? We looked at the manifestos of the main political parties, the ones that were in fact going to be most successful in the European parliamentary elections. And if you look at the top line, this is the content of the manifesto of the European People's Party, which in fact did win more seats in the European parliamentary elections and are the biggest group there. Now, I have to thank an industry association for this slide and the detail of it, but what is particularly interesting is that top row of climate, transport, energy, industrial strategy, and chemicals. And you will see, for example, that they've identified no bans in transport, neutrality by 2050, whereas the Green Party at the bottom of that particular column are looking for neutrality by 2040, so a shorter timetable. Also, you will note, for example, for the European Socialists, so that's the PES, that red square on the left, fight against plastic and chemical pollution, especially PFAS, whereas there's no mention of this in the EPP manifesto. So it is a very useful source to know in which direction the European political parties are going to go and vote. And that is of crucial importance because there is a link between the European Parliament and the European Commission. I'll see if I can move on to my next slide now. This slide depicts the European parliamentary election results. And so you'll see that there is a hemicycle, so half a pie. The left-hand side of the pie are more left-leaning political parties, and the right-hand side of the pie are the right-leaning political parties. The larger fan on the outside was the forecast seats, and the little fan in the middle are the actual current seats in the European Parliament. So I used this slide because I wanted to demonstrate, you see that shift towards the right, so the central parties just shifted a little bit more towards the right. It could have been worse, to be honest. However, this is what we're dealing with, and what is of particular importance here is that the amalgamation of the European People's Party and the European Conservatives and Reformists can create a majority against the left-leaning parties. What I also wanted to say is there was an interestingly high turnout in June 2024. It's 51% of the population. This was the highest since 1994 when it reached 56%. But it showed that European elections continued to be a second-order vote. There was low visibility for genuinely European topics. No particular country said that they were going to leave the European Union, though, at the other extreme. But yes, there were national political figures that dominated the debate, especially in France and Italy, where the campaigns were strongly personalized. Now, the overall political color, the results of the European elections have to be reflected in the political color of the new European Commission. And so the Spitzenkandidat system, so the system of the leader who is chosen by that winning out political party, has been used this time. And Mrs. von der Leyen is the candidate for the European People's Party, and therefore, as the largest party, has become the Commissioner President designate of the European Commission. The system of the link between the European Parliament and the European Commission was put in place to counter the democratic deficit. And so it was to create a political link and to bring the citizens closer to the work of the European Commission. So over the weeks since the elections, member states have nominated commissioners who have been duly sent to Brussels, and this should be the look of the new future European Commission if all of the commissioners designates are confirmed in their particular positions. The parliamentary screening, the hearings of these commissioners are taking place between the 4th and the 12th of November. Sorry. And the final vote confirming these commissioners, if that's the case, will be between the 25th and the 28th of November. And so it will only be at the very beginning of December that the new European Commission meets. So it really does take about 6 months between the parliamentary elections and the setting up of the new Commission. However, work continues in Brussels. There are still people to see. There are still people to influence. There are still campaigns to put together. I just wanted to comment on this configuration, I should say. It is with 6 executive vice presidents. It is gender balance, more or less. It's 60% male, 40% female, but 5 of the 7 top leadership roles are of women, including the president. There is a baffling plethora of cross-cutting portfolios, and I think that's something which I would like to hear your comments on, Antonia and Cassia. I discussed this with Cassia yesterday, pointing to animal welfare and health, and she did see the connectivity there. I found that I was very pleased animal health is included, but it still needs to be clarified for me. There's also pleasing additions like intergenerational fairness. Again, not quite sure what the content means, but it sounds positive. I think it's a good inclusion. So yes, a mixed bag. Some of the commissioners have got single areas, which again are a bit baffling, like the Mediterranean. I'm thinking environment, the sea, migrants, but I'm not quite seeing how that ties in with other priorities in the portfolios. So interested in hearing your insights, Cassia and Antonia, on this batch of commissioner designates. I'm going to stop here on the scene setting slides. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope this works. Is that okay? Stop that. Got the technical part right. Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Antonia first and ask for your general comments on this outlook and on this process that I'm sure you've gone through as director of Alliance 2015.
Thanks, Rachel. It's lovely to be with you all, and thanks for that excellent exposition of what we're in the middle of. And indeed, it's been even if it wasn't a hot and sweaty summer in Brussels, I think it's been hot and sweaty from a political perspective. So I think I might kick off the conversation between us with a few comments. I mean, first of all, on the Parliament. I think what our analysis would suggest is indeed the move to the right wasn't as the shift wasn't as strong as we feared. However, the parliamentary picture, as you could see from Rachel's lovely fan picture, is messy. And what it means is, I think, for our particular issues, like looking at development, humanitarian, human rights issues, issues around peace and security, the connected issues around climate, environment, food, agriculture, all of those things that go to build up what we still very much cleave to, the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. They're less of a given in this setup. And what we find is that while there are a few stalwarts in the committees that we would normally work with, so we're very happy, for example, that the Development Committee is run by Renew candidate from Ireland, Renew MEP from Ireland, Barry Andrews. We know that he's a firm supporter of our issues, but he has told us frankly that he's now chairing a committee with plenty of people who don't think that development assistance is something that the EU or its member states should be investing in anymore. In fact, they don't see it as an investment at all. And some of them would question the validity of the role of civil society organizations like those represented in our network. So somehow we have to navigate through this. And I think our overall sense with the Parliament is that while we have some champions to rely on, what we're going to need to do is look for people with whom we could work on specific issues to make specific shifts, who might not agree with our overall narrative, but where we might be able to make some moves forward. So I think we'll have to take a more tactical approach. And I also think that we may have to look at our language. While we will never step away from our values as civil society, it's written into our mandates, and that's of course linked to our legal basis. We understand that the way we describe the world doesn't always make sense to some of these people with different views. And we're trying to take this as an opportunity, perhaps to become more effective advocates and communicators, and to step a bit away from some of our favorite jargon, working in the nexus or human rights-based approaches, which might either frighten off or bore the people that we're trying to persuade. So I'll stop there on the Parliament. On the Commission, I would say a few things. Good and bad. We would certainly agree with your analysis that the portfolios are extremely overlapping. We definitely agree with the reading that this is a power consolidation by a now very well rooted President, Ursula von der Leyen. We can see some very strong themes, some of which relate to what we deeply care about and work on in the humanitarian development sector, but also with some concerns. So, I mean, for us, we see the whole thing and the analysis of the mission letters, which are a little bit like job descriptions that we all get to pore over before the commissioners get approved or kicked out by the Parliament. And in them we see a lot of this focus on, we've gone from a geopolitical commission to a geoeconomic one. We're more concerned about our own interests than how we work in a more collaborative way in the world at large. So we see a lot on security, on defense, on migration as a problem, as opposed to a human reality, which adds a lot to the positive sum of the progress of people and planet, and European competitiveness. So I'm sure Cassia will come back to this, but we see a sort of shift away from the idea of a Green New Deal to clean industrial policy. And although the Sustainable Development Goals and humanitarian principles still found their way into the two relevant commissioners' mission letters, they're clearly downgraded, and the commissioner who would be in charge of what used to be called development cooperation, which is not a very trendy term at the EU level anymore, he is a Czech former investment banker and finance specialist, and his letter does not mention the role of civil society. The word civil society don't appear in his letter. So even though the SDGs do, and a demand for him and the new commissioner for emergencies and disasters to come up with some kind of approach to fragile states, we think that there being no mention of civil society is a problem. And then I will make one last point, and then I'd love to hear what you think, Cassia, but we're quite concerned about the fact that the equality portfolio, which is a vitally important portfolio, both in terms of the European Commission and Union's work internally, but also in its relations with the rest of the world, has been squashed in to the mandate of the Commissioner overseeing emergency preparedness, crisis preparedness and response. We would say that that's a big problem. They're two enormous jobs. They shouldn't be done by one person, and it looks like it's a downgrade. Last point, as a feminist, I am very happy to see that finally there is a woman of colour who's been designated to be a commissioner. It is amazing that in 2024, this is the first time that this has ever happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia. Cassia.
Thank you. I will speak quickly on a few things. And first, on this move to the right, which can also be exacerbated by national elections, as we are seeing, like the right grew in the Netherlands, in Portugal, is a movement. And we also have big elections from the US. So that is not like something from the EU. And of course, wars just exacerbate this need for like strong and like let's prioritize our issues instead of like thinking about working collaboratively with other countries and people. So I feel that that's a movement that might have several impacts and might not be gone. It might be exacerbated with future or previous national elections. These also raise some concerns. Like I spoke with EU-based NGOs that operate in Latin America, that they are anticipating cuts of even 80%, depending on national elections of their countries. So, and I know a lot of NGOs that are on EU work beyond. So we might see impacts on activities overseas. That's also something. Talking about employment, even like the EU bureaucracy or like aid from national countries that work, like people that work in these fields, like we might see diminishing like vacancies or like even cuts if there's an issue. We also see like this the shift that there was a lot of legislation. We mentioned the EU Green Deal and other things, but I feel as a civil society and not-for-profit sector, we should go like beyond lobbying and campaigning now to be implementation supporters. So that's a big shift because there's a lot of legislation that was either approved or like we have things to work on. But the big thing is like how to implement this. Like I was at the New York Climate Week before, and since the past COPs, as also teaching sustainable development policies. I feel like we started this in the why, like why we have to be like sustainable, why we have to tackle climate change. Like we moved like 10 years, 15 years ago to the what, like what should we do? Like there was a lot of on this, like we have Project Drawdown, we have the Green Deals. There's a lot on the what. Now the big question is how? How are we going to do everything that we committed to? And we see interesting processes like the missions that the EU have, which are quite unique, like the cities missions, for instance, Climate Kick is supporting through the Net Zero Cities program, is an example of trying to say, okay, now that we have these commitments, let's channel resources and help the cities to become net zero by 2030, which is below all the thresholds that we saw in Rachel's presentation before. So like, I feel as a not-for-profit sector, there's this demand, and we might need to change a lot of skills and how we will operate, and even how funding is channeled. And we just mentioned that I published a bit thing about like philanthropy, and most of the philanthropy is of what Arthur Scheimer now calls like 2.0, which is like these donor-demanded projects, that they are more concerned about the KPIs or how many people you had in your event than the real impact. We have to shift like rapidly from 4.0. We don't even have time to the 3.0 anymore. Like we need to have more bold like philanthropy that because otherwise we don't have space to make mistakes. For instance, we approve projects that are conservative and easy to implement, but are these things that we need the most at this moment? And at the same time, like I feel like being in New York, like it's quite nostalgic. I lived there and I was there during the 2015 processes of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And I saw there was such a hope for multilateralism like 10 years ago. Whereas now, like we saw, COVID kind of killed the SDGs somehow. Like not only a lot of people, we saw that all this appetite decrease, and we saw the vaccine appetite worldwide, whereas like someone in the US who like 18-year-old was on the 4th shot, whereas an old person in India had no vaccine at all. And we are coming to see the climate appetite if you don't do anything, which will exacerbate other things that we spoke, like migration. If 1/3 of Bangladesh territory is not safe, like by 2050 to live, like these people will go somewhere. So it is also, maybe we'll need to find ways to talk with the right-wing politicians that investing in overseas is also something about internal security. Like it's better to help like people, because nobody wants to leave. Only 3% of people are immigrants at some point of their lives. Nobody wants to leave their countries. Like it's not the main thing that we think. Like we leave for other, sometimes for opportunities, but most of the time is because of a need. So it's also important to see. And also, like as we saw with the COVID, like it's not that we are on the same boat. We are in the same store in different boats. And like we are seeing like I also wonder how quick the EU bureaucracy is equipped to act, as we are seeing now climate change becoming like a full reality with impacts that are like we were supposed to see in 10 years from now happening now. Like we saw 2 massive hurricanes in the US with 2 weeks of difference, and this will become more common also in EU. So I think that's a big challenge, because we are going to see a lot of impacts here, and will be more difficult to justify working overseas, but at the same time is needed. So I wonder how we are going to combine all these pressing demands.
Thank you. The fascinating angles that you've come at as well. Antonia, I know that you want to come back on several of these points that Cassia has mentioned.
Yes, I mean, I think this question about the way, what we react to and when has been absolutely critical. I mean, I was in a discussion just yesterday about the EU's global gateway, which I will come back to, but this is also something that is a new strategic approach by the EU, woven into absolutely all of the mission letters, and its approach for the future. And the discussion yesterday was about, well, how is this relevant to the fragile states, or the politically estranged states, as they're called, with which the EU has had critical relationships for years, and of course that member states of the EU have had long historical relationships with, and where I think finally, and this is maybe a more sort of positive note on the multilateralism challenge, we're actually seeing, I think a movement with muscles and teeth to say we can no longer have a multilateral world order that was designed, more than almost 100 years ago. It's no longer fit for purpose. We need a more inclusive multilateral order. So, I mean, the positive side of this is that, while we are trying to work on issues like decolonization and understanding how, like, the international nonprofit sector, which to some extent is born out of that colonialization movement, how can it recast itself in solidarity with the majority world? And how can we make sure that the EU's, like, the positive aspects of the EU's approaches, which is, well, it's time that we had open and transparent discussions with partner countries about, how we work together and who invests where and how to achieve standards. This is, I think, this is a positive sign that the long needed change is coming. But, I think it doesn't come evenly. It probably, as Cassia says, comes too late. And I think that, what one would hope for in this situation is leadership that is really visionary in terms of people and planet. And I suppose what I see is, I see visionary leaders in terms of people and planet around me in my sector, people like Cassia, all of the local organizations that we're working with on the ground who are either doing service delivery, advocating to their government, campaigning, trying to influence policy. There I see vision. At the risk of saying something I shouldn't, I don't feel I see a lot of that vision, in the political leadership of the EU currently. I mean, that's, what I see more is, frightened people doing the classic thing that people do when they're nervous, which is to pull up the drawbridge and try and hide behind a stout wall, rather than thinking, in fact, that it's by stronger collaboration and by recognizing that, in fact, the challenges we face are common challenges. I mean, our food systems challenge, our climate challenge, we know how they've been created and we know how they can be solved, and this cannot be done without global collaboration. And we do worry that the EU is stepping away from that, but we also think we have an incredibly important and exciting role as civil society, together with all of the European and global citizens that believe in this, in a much more collaborative approach. And that's, what we're going to try and push for, even in times that indeed do seem quite dark in other ways.
Thank you, Antonia. I just want to throw into this the possibility that Donald Trump is going to be re-elected to the White House as well. I think that the EU is in a position to take a leadership role, but as you said, seems to have stepped away from it. We don't see much courage. We don't see any positive signs in the letters, and the focus we feel from von der Leyen Commission as well is this focus on economic security. So it's, as you said, it's battening down the hatches and drawing up the drawbridge, closing the door of the house, instead of sort of boldly striding out there and taking that leadership position on, for example, environmental issues, but on migration. And I was also interested in Cassia's talk about the link between environment and migration, and it is, if Bangladesh is no longer there because it's taken over by the sea, where are the Bangladeshis going to go? This is just going to be an exacerbation of a problem that we already have. Cassia, sorry, you wanted to come back, and then I'll come back to Antonia about the changing of the language to include maybe the far right decision makers as well. And who are you prepared to reach out to? So, Cassia, maybe on what Antonia has said.
On several things, I try to be concise. First, I really like when like also to hear people outside our world, like, you know, like a Western, the weird societies, like, and there is a Brazilian indigenous writer, Ailton Krenak, that he mentioned that like for indigenous people in Brazil, their world like was over like 500 years ago. So they went through the end of the world. And he says that we are going to do this now as a Western society. Like our world will fall, like somehow. Like we are not going to have the same world of the end of last century anymore in 20, 30 years from now. The question is, how bad will this fall, or will we be able to collaborate to build something good of this? There will be a lot of, so I feel most of people are not awakened for this reality. They still are trying to push things as they were like 50 years ago. And like I feel like as Europe, with the resources we have, the knowledge and the history, we can try to like make something like a new way of living out of it. So that's more like can be a lost opportunity. And if we don't do this, like chaos can prevail at some point. Like I feel for me, like watching, like for instance, series as Handmaid's Tale, like we take things for granted. Like maybe in 50 years from now, we are not going to be a democracy anymore in many of the European countries if we don't, you know, like push for this, like, or women's right, which is so fragile. The first thing that is attacked is women's right. We saw in the US, like with many like right to fertility rights and others like being attacked. So I feel Europe, as Antonia mentioned, we do have a past of colonization to think and try to break out of it and build better ways of collaborate even with other countries. But at the same time, we do have like we are among the continents with like better women's issues and many things that we should protect and also collaborate with other countries that want to advance on these issues, like so also social protections that we don't see pretty much anywhere in the world. So we shouldn't take this for granted first, and we should like really, and at the same time, we should show that because people are frightened, that we can build a better world also by investing in sustainability, by investing in other areas that not-for-profits work. And the just transition agenda is a way to show that, like, people are frightened. So if you show that for a coal miner that they can get better jobs through a just transition plan, they will not vote for extreme right that will, because of this, they will be open. So I think the best way that we can do is also to show results. And oftentimes progressive people, we were not as good as doing a narrative. We are too complicated, too jargon. Like if you say like to the average person that is like taking care of their life, and we want a human right, blah blah blah. But if you show like how this reflects in their life, like we want your daughter to have a good job, like they will understand, you know. So I think it's part of the narrative. And just the final two things that we spoke about, the animal welfare and future generations that increase. Like animal welfare is a good example. Like Europe is the continent most advanced in this topic, and this is a topic that mostly young people care about, or like people with conditions to live. Because if you are in poverty, you don't care as much how the pig is treated, and it's fair, you know. Like you have things that are more like important for you right now. And this can be something that we can also relate with climate change, like to do, because like there's big agriculture organizations, they have a huge impact. They have also human rights impact. So we can leverage on this, and the future generations, like that for the first time, like as evidently, like we are deciding things that will impact the future generations in a way of no return, like because they are like related to climate, they're related to environment. So it's nice to see this being incorporated. We saw in the new UN declarations, we are seeing this push. There is a book like The Minister for the Future. There is a climate fiction that talks about this possibility of have a UN agency for the future generation. So I hope we can take them also in consideration when you are making these decisions, because and by future generation, I mean someone born today. It's not like 7 generations from now, like but yeah.
Thank you. So Antonia, there's a bleak outlook, but there's a positive outlook as well. This connection also with youth. I think that you're saying much the same thing also. I wanted to come back to this adaptation of language and changing the language. And I wanted to ask you, Antonia, if you, whenever it's opportune to do so and relevant to do so, will you engage with the far right, for example, in the European Parliament? You said that it is a mottled picture. You describe one political party where you're able probably to converse with one or two members, but maybe not with the others because you haven't got the same vocabulary and they don't believe in the rationale behind the organizations that you lead per se. So will you do that? Well, what is your outlook in doing that? Would you engage with the far right? How would you adapt your language? And how would you leverage the positive elements out of this?
Yeah, well, an excellent and a mean question, Rachel. So I guess what I would say, first of all, is that one of the challenges we have in civil society is that we don't have an endless amount of resources. So you mentioned the point that, business is always saying, NGOs get all of this access. But I'll just tell you one quick story before I do answer your question, not behaving like a politician. I was recently, last week, at the Civil Society and Local Authorities Dialogue Platform for the Global Gateway. And we were engaged in a debate with Koen, who is a very powerful EU bureaucrat. He's the Director General of the International Partnerships Directorate, so a very significant person. And he explained to us that our parallel group, the Business Advisory Group for the Global Gateway, had met 8 times last year, plus twice with him and once with Ursula von der Leyen. And I said to him, it seemed a shame to me that this was the second time only that our platform was meeting, and it's only the second time we've met him, and we've never been invited to either meet the Business Advisory Group or Mrs. von der Leyen, and we thought that it might be good if he could rectify that. So there's something about who gets to talk to who. So and it's partly related to who thinks what is important, and also we only have the limited resources we do. And I say that to say that we will target the people that we think we have most possibility of persuading. So I would say that MEPs in the European Parliament have been elected by European citizens. They sit legitimately in the Parliament, whether we like it or not. So if it happens that such a person is in a meeting that we were at, certainly we would engage and talk. I don't think it's up to us to impose, for example, cordon sanitaire. I'm not sure we would choose to talk to people that we're pretty sure we would never persuade of anything. I think we would target MEPs, kind of right-wing MEPs to whom we might be able to talk about, a topic like nutrition, where really you could say this isn't an ideological discussion. It's just a way of working both inside and outside Europe, where it is proven that for every dollar you invest, in fact, 16 are added to GDP because of the productivity, the fact that people don't have to go to hospital, that people aren't wasted and stunted, etc. So these are the sorts of things that we would try and focus and work on, if that's a fair answer to the question.
It is. Thank you. And I think you were careful also to underline the element of resources. It's time and it's money. You have to target where you think that you will be successful, but without excluding. And I think that that's espousing also the democratic principles that we like and that we want to maintain here in Europe as well. Even if, as Cassia pointed out, there is a rise of more far-right countries. One of the things I wanted to ask you both about as well is we noticed going through the analysis of the portfolios that foresight seems to have disappeared from the picture. Foresight, you'd mentioned vision several times, Antonia, and you also, Cassia, and you were talking about projection into the future in relation to involvement of youth. I'm not very clear about why foresight has disappeared, but I would underline that it does. We seem to be dealing with ad hoc situations and trying to put out fires, and are not able to take that leadership globally because there is little foresight, there is little clear vision, and you've got to get all your soldiers aligned yourself within the EU before you can engage externally. But it would be something which I would suggest that the European Commission should focus a little bit more on as well. I hope that it will emanate from the president's office, and that's why it's not an element within the portfolios. But foresight had been there for the past 2 legislatures. Cassia, have you got any thoughts about that in relation to, for example, that projection of youth and also in the climate sector? There is a need for foresight, just as there is a need for evidence-based research when you're advocating something or lobbying for something, either in the Commission or the European Parliament.
And I think we can also learn, we cannot, like, as we are not commissioners, like directly, at least the 3 of us, we cannot do this directly there, but even as not-for-profit, I think the best way to build a different world is making the old one obsolete. So like it's way more effective saying that this is wrong, that is wrong, this should change, to say this is better. Like, and I think it's also a better way to also talk to people that are different than us. Like instead of convincing them that they shouldn't do this or that, like for instance, in the case like talking about young people, animal welfare, like, okay, you should decrease meat consumption. It's better to develop alternatives that taste better. You can show it's healthier to eat less meat. Like you can try this, like it's more positive. So I feel like we also need this. And when we are like afraid and as I said, like trying to be close among ourselves, maybe the foresight come there, like to show like a better world can be done. Like it's not like say, okay, it's not like these boring things we have to reduce emissions, but like what if we all could bike to work? Like wouldn't it be better? Like wouldn't you feel better? And you can start the conversations and try to get more buy-in, like showing how like you would feel also better with this world. Like we can. And I think the Green New Deals, both the US and the European, they were trying to go in this direction, and we might need to recover we have to plan what world we want to be like, and that's not right and wrong. Like it's not going to fall like on our on us like something. We need to start like building this now, and this exercise of long term, medium term, and short term, like what we have to approve now for having like better mobility in 20 years. Like we should start like really put this together and channel resources more wisely, like in a way that 1 + 1 is 5, because we are identify the leverages, like what would change most. And learn from each other. I think each European country has a good and a bad thing that we can like exchange this information and try to build this faster. Yeah, I think we are in a moment that we like, okay, there were a few changes, but we still have like the European Parliament that care about these things, which is not, we can also not take for granted. And I can just to also end with another book recommendation that I met Adam Kahane from Rios Partners. Like he followed the process post-apartheid in South Africa, and he has a good book, say, Collaborating with the Enemy. And by enemy, it doesn't have to be someone that you want to annihilate, like in a war, but like we might need to learn to collaborate with people that don't think like us, that we don't trust. And I think it's true for all of us that work in this. And one of the things he said, like, let's start for like what we agree, because, and even as progressive or not-for-profit, we fight among each other. I never seen so much fight sometimes in the not-for-profit sector. Even companies, they don't fight as much. So like, can we like start, okay, baseline, we agree 80% of things. Can we start from there instead of fighting on the 20% that we cannot get like into agreement now? Because and even among us, sometimes who is the most feminist or whatever, the greener, like, so you are a vegan and you only ride a bike and you never take a car. So, but other people are trying also. So how can we, instead of like, no, I don't speak with you, like this kind of approach doesn't work, because as you see, we need to speak and we need to find solutions. So I think that's also something that we can try to apply.
I think that's a very positive thought, Cassia. And I see Antonia nodding. The clock is ticking, and I thought that this was a good lead in, if you agree, to the final topic as well, which is about people. So we've been talking about ourselves, yourselves, skill sets, how you accept, how open you are to go across the bridge and to the other side of the river and see how people live and how they communicate as well there. You also mentioned, Cassia, leading by example, you know, the 80-20 approach as well. Let's look at the positive side of things and do some nudging towards, you know, positive action. We are privileged in the European Union. We are privileged in relation to the rest of the world. And I think that we have some leadership responsibilities and the ability to do that. So moving on to this last topic as well, which is about people search and recruitment. Cassia, you also mentioned maybe a different type of skill set to what we've had traditionally, maybe since the 1980s within the civil society sector. We need to be implementing, as you said. There's been a lot of legislation which has been approved, and we need to move on to maybe something a little bit more technical as well as a skill set, and an open-minded understanding about different solutions for the environment. Is this the same thing, Antonia, in your particular sector? You know, what might be the criteria of future leaders? What might you be looking for? Is there a difference in knowledge, experience, and skills that you might be looking for in your future collaborators?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. It's always such an interesting question. And I think I would say that, you know, what I see around me in my sector right now are a little bit a mix of what, you know, we've just heard. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are confused, worried, even fearful. They're fearful about the world. I think some of them are also fearful about their jobs because of the finance and funding issues that you mentioned. But also I see like a huge amount of passion and commitment, and it's into that any future recruitment that I would be lucky enough to do would really dig. And what I would be looking for are people who are interested in working in this more kind of matrixed environment, like with a co-leadership approach. I mean, I'm really interested in people who are less concerned about hierarchy and more concerned about like smart ways of getting things done. I think also these skills in terms of communications and advocacy, I see them being relevant everywhere. So I think you need people in our kinds of organizations. You need expert implementers. You need people who are brilliant researchers and evidence creators. You need people that can connect those and speak about them both in ways that gives the profile that's needed, but is also convincing to your different audiences. So I would really be looking for people also with, I mean, I wanted to say entrepreneurial attitude, except that, I mean, in a way, to me, that harks back a bit to, I think, a bad old way of thinking in the nonprofit sector, which is a bit like, we're going to do what businesses did, but like 15 years ago, you know, we'll do that. We'll do mergers and acquisitions, or, you know, we'll do, and I think, you know, we have to recognize we're just, you know, we're different. You know, we're not profit-making organizations, even if increasingly we're involving ourselves with, you know, social impact investing or social businesses, all very interesting, but we're driven by, you know, we walk to a different drum. And so I think we want people that really are interested in looking and kind of building and jumping into a new future. I think what I would be worried about would be people who, in their understandable passion to make sure that the civil society sector is protected and that our issues still have a place on the table, are somehow harking back to the way things were, because the way things were, I think, is, I mean, obviously is already over. And I'm totally on board with Cassia saying we you know, we have to co-construct the future now, and those are the people that I would be looking to work with.
Thank you. Really, really interesting. Same question to you, Cassia. What is going to be different, or what would you be looking for in future collaboration in your colleagues? What is the skill set, experience, and knowledge which is going to stand out? And you know, in the context of what Antonia says as well, it is no, there shouldn't be a going back to what business was 15 years ago. and the mergers and acquisitions, which we do see even in Brussels, Antonia, as well in the not-for-profit sector?
I think on one hand, like the soft skills, and they are called soft because hard was related to military hard equipment back on the days when they created this denomination. They will be more and more needed because we are seeing increasing volatility. And if you cannot get your head together with so much things changing, and this goes across all levels, like from intern to CEO, like there's a lot, like you need to be able to talk to people, to be at the same time firm, but not abusive. You need to we see a lot of people now as we work with youth climate leaders complaining about Gen Z. Oh, they don't know how, they don't want to work, and blah blah blah. But at the same time, they will not accept the abuse that millennials accepted, and that's a good thing that they are bringing. But at the same time, also, as everything is not all 100% good or bad, social media impacts like their ambitions. Like they are sometimes 18 and think they should be the CEO of the organization, and and they are really sure about it. And so I think you need to, and like when you give feedback, I have seen and I have heard like experiences of being landing very badly like sometimes. So like emotional intelligence is about this, like you understand that it's not about you, it's not personal. Like if this report was not good, I'm not saying you're a failure. And this like look, and I talked to HR people because of youth climate leaders, and I really like a quote saying that young people are often hired by their technical skills, and they leave because of the lack of emotional skills, like in many organizations. So that's also something, and most of the time, like universities are not teaching this, schools are not teaching this, so we might start like teaching that more often. And about entrepreneurial mindset, I think it also goes in the direction that we are doing things that we have never done. So I see a lot of people frustrated because they wanted clear commands, like I have to do that and that, but we are not in a world of clear commands, and for sure not in the not-for-profit sector. So I think being able to change, to be flexible, to adapt, and to build your way without like these guidelines, I will be more and more seeing. And we don't have time for this now, but maybe it's interesting to reflect on how AI will impact, because even the technical skill, like a lot of NGO or lobby in Brussels is doing reports, like for sure in 2 years, ChatGPT or whatever else will be able to do this. And so what we can bring and add value that goes beyond that. And I think it's about building alliances, like being articulators. Like it's not like only the report, but like I'll say, okay, with this report, I will contact that organization. I try to channel fund for this. And yeah, and I think like we might see like we can if there's like we can build this as an opportunity, like let's finally have more free time, because we see Domenico De Masi talking for a lot about being idle, and like with the emails we would have more free time, but no, we just worked more and more. But now with AI we have a choice. We can, instead of like fire a lot of people, we can all of us work less and focus on other things that are important, focus on rebuilding our communities and other ways. So I feel like for sure, like we are going to see a different world environment, and work will be a smaller part of people's lives that were for our generations and the past ones. And we need to put something better than social media to the other part, hopefully.
Well, I can only agree with you. I think that we should all be doing more within our communities and for the planet and for future generations, actually. It's all interlinked as well. The business sector will say, yes, but we have to eat and we have to pay for our houses and education. So we need to move forward, hence also the need for more foresight. You've both been very, very insightful and full of content also on this last question. If you've got one takeaway from this session before I thank you and close, what might be that one takeaway? Antonia.
Keep the faith, all is not lost.
I like that. And Cassia?
Let's go to work because we are late, but we still have some time.
Okay, still positive again as well then. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you profusely. Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed this. I hope that our participants have as well, that you've learned something and that we keep the faith in the future. Thank you very much, Antonia and Cassia, for participating in this session. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. It was a real pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.